On a $2.7 million home in Coconut Grove, your seller cost in 2026 could easily be $150,000 before you pack a single box. And I'll be honest, that's the moment most sellers stop and say, wait, where is all of that going? And the truth is, most sellers don't find out until it's too late to do anything about it. Because once you factor in your commissions, taxes, concessions, and everything else, your sale price and what you actually walk away with can be a very different number. And I'm not saying that to scare you. I'm saying it because knowing that number before you list is one of the most powerful things you can do as a seller. So in this video, I'm breaking it all down with real numbers so you know exactly what to expect before you list your home. If we haven't met yet, I'm Rebeca Cruz with RealMiami, and I specialize in Coconut Grove and Miami real estate. On this channel, I'll break down what you need to know about buying, selling, and living in Miami with honest, practical advice so that you can make smart decisions before you make expensive ones. And before we get into all the actual seller costs, let's quickly talk about the market you're selling into in 2026, because that changes the math also. In February 2026, the median sales price in Coconut Grove is about $2.7 million. So this is still very much a luxury market. But it is not the same market sellers were in a few years ago. Homes are taking longer to sell, buyers have more negotiating power, and a lot of sellers are still pricing like it was 2021. Those homes sit. The ones that sell are priced in today's reality, and even with a high percentage of cash buyers, people are paying much more closer attention now to insurance, flood risk, maintenance, reserve funding, and yes, even things like radon testing, which we're seeing come up more and more in inspections. So when I talk to sellers in Coconut Grove, I always say this: the goal is not just your sale price, it's what you actually walk away with. That's called your net proceeds. So now that you understand the market you're selling into, let's start with the biggest number most sellers see first: our commissions. Average total commissions in Florida are still around 5.5 to 5.6%. We typically break down to about 3% to the list side and 2.5% to the buyer's agent. So on a $2.7 million sale, the listing side is about $81,000 in compensation and the buyer side is about $67,500. And the total potential commission is $148,500. And let me just say this, that's usually the moment where everything starts to feel real. Because that's not a small number, that's the price of a luxury car just gone at closing. Now here's where things get confusing. You've probably heard after the NAR settlement, sellers don't have to pay the buyer's agent anymore. And technically, that's true. But here's what's actually happening in the market. If you choose not to offer buyer agent compensation, you're asking buyers to come out of pocket for their agent, on top of an already expensive purchase. And in a luxury market where buyers are already stretching, that creates lots of friction. So yes, you have more control now, but strategy matters more than ever. The question isn't, do I have to pay it? It's, what does it cost me if I don't do it? Now let's talk about the tax Miami-Dade adds on top of that, and why condo sellers get a very specific surprise here. Single family homes pay about 0.60 per $100. That's 0.6%. So on a $2.7 million home, that's $16,200. But for condos, they pay 1.05 per 100, or 1.05%. So the tax on that same $2.7 million condo is now $28,350. That's over $12,000 more for the same price point. And I've seen this catch sellers completely off guard. I've had a seller last year, condo in the Grove, strong price, smooth deal. We get to the closing statement and they go, wait, what is this $28,000 line? And I had to explain, that's just the transfer tax. Just the tax on top of everything else. In Miami-Dade, how your property is classified can easily cost you 5 figures. So now you've understood commission and transfer tax a bit more. Next is something most sellers have heard of, but they don't really understand until closing: the title insurance. On a $2.7 million sale, title insurance is about $9,325, plus another $500 to $1,500 in closing related fees. In Florida, it's called a promulgated rate state, which means the title insurance premium is set by the state. So you're not really shopping for that number, it's standardized. It's not the biggest number, but it's one more piece coming out of your net. And then there's another cost that shows up quietly, but still matters, and that's your property taxes. Florida does property taxes a little differently. You pay them in arrears, which means at closing, you owe the buyer for the portion of the year you owned in the home. But here's where it gets interesting. If you've owned your home for a while and have homestead exemption, your tax bill may be based on a much lower value. So your tax at closing might actually feel lower than expected. But after the sale, the buyer's taxes reset closer to market value. And in 2026, buyers already know that. Your tax at closing might look low, but your buyer is already calculating what theirs will be. Now, if you're selling a condo, everything we've talked about so far still applies, but there's another layer you need to understand. You've got estoppel fees, typically up to about $299, sometimes more if you rush with delinquency. There can be additional HOA-related fees as well, but the real issue in 2026 is the reserves and the special assessments. And if a seller knows about a pending assessment and fails to disclose it, that's not just a negotiation issue. That can become a legal issue, and I've seen this happen. I had a seller in a Grove condo. Everything looked fine at first. Then halfway through the deal, the buyer found out that there was a pending assessment. And just like that, the deal was gone. Not because they didn't love the property, but because uncertainty at that price point is a deal breaker. At this level, surprises don't negotiate, they kill deals. And even if your property is perfect, there's another category that comes back in 2026, concessions. On a $2.7 million sale, 2% equals $54,000. 3% equals $81,000. And I've watched this happen more than once. A seller holds firm on a price for months, then gives back a $60,000 in credit after inspections anyway. Same result, just more time, more stress, and more negotiation. You either price it right up front or negotiate it back later. So now that we've talked about what happens at closing, let's talk about what happens before you even list. You might spend $1,000 to $5,000 on repairs, $500 to $7,000 on cleaning and painting, $1,500 to $4,000 for marketing, $5,000 to $15,000 for staging. But here's what matters most in 2026: insurance readiness. If your home raises concerns, roof, electrical, plumbing, wind mitigation, or even newer concerns like radon testing, that's where deals fall apart or get renegotiated. So doing a 4-point inspection or wind mitigation report before you list can remove that friction. You either control the narrative before you list or the buyer controls it after the inspection. And beyond those bigger costs, there are still a few smaller ones that show up at closing. Recording fees are about $70 to $100. Attorney fees, if you use one, are usually around $750 to $1,250. And honestly, these are the costs nobody ever complains about, because by the time you see them, you've already processed the $150,000 in compensation. Now, everything we've talked about so far happens at closing, but there are two more things that can affect your number, and they happen after. First, your mortgage payoff. If you still have a loan, that balance gets paid off from your proceeds at closing. And this is where some sellers are surprised. The sale price looks great, but once you subtract closing costs, concessions, and your loan payoff, your actual equity can be very different. That's why I always recommend requesting a payoff settlement before you list. And then there's the big one, the capital gains tax. Everything we talked about, that's at your closing. This is what happens after. If you've owned your property for years, you can be looking at up to 20% capital gains plus 3.8 NIT depending on your income level. And I've seen this catch people completely off guard. And if there's an investment property, a 1031 exchange may allow you to defer that. If you wait until closing to understand your taxes, you've waited way too long. So when you put all of this together, here's what it actually looks like. Most sellers find out what they're actually walking away with at the closing table. The ones who win, they knew it before they listed. Before any of my sellers go on the market, I build a custom net proceeds sheet with your actual numbers. So if you're thinking about selling in Coconut Grove and want to know what exactly you would walk away with based on your property, your mortgage, your condo, or HOA situation in today's market, my contact information is below in the description. Let's get on a call today. And as always, if you want more honest breakdowns like this, make sure you subscribe. I'm Rebeca Cruz with RealMiami, and I'll see you at the next video. For a $2.7 million sale, well, I don't know what the fuck this is. Now $28,350. But it's one of the most, what are we even talking about here? That's not just a negotiation. The buyer found out that there was a sale pending you've already processed 1,000.